May 18th, 2009. It's a beautiful spring day in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At prestigious Harvard University, students are preparing for final exams. But just before 5 p.m., the stillness is shattered in an explosion of violence when gunshots ring out from the Kirkland House dormitory.
No one could have seen this coming.
It was really shocking.
Seconds later, a young African-American man stumbles from the dorm and into the path of stunned onlookers. Suffering from what appears to be a gunshot wound to the abdomen, the man slumps to the ground, a pool of blood collecting underneath him. Moments later, the first 911 calls begin pouring in. Police and paramedics race to the scene and rush the man to the nearest hospital. Word of the shooting spreads like wildfire across campus, leaving everyone wondering, how could something like this have happened at such a revered institution?
My boss told me somebody got shot at Harvard, and I looked at him like, with what, a super soaker? Because people usually don't get shot at Harvard University.
But as police comb the campus for clues, they uncover a seedy undercurrent of sex, lies, and drugs, along with a conspiracy that will threaten to take down one of Harvard's brightest stars.
This young woman was just caught in a bad situation.
Born in Harlem, New York in 1987, Brittany Smith didn't come from a life of wealth and privilege.
She had an upbringing with a single-parent household. She lived with her father. Her mother was on narcotics, and so her father predominantly raised her.
But Brittany didn't let her tough upbringing keep her down. She dreamed of one day attending an Ivy League school and worked hard to achieve it.
Brittany Smith was a very bright child. She went to a high school that had a very rigorous curriculum, graduated from there, top of her class.
Very scholarly, loved doing volunteer work. She organized canned food drives and was an officer for her student council.
All that hard work paid off in 2005 when Brittany was accepted into one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, Harvard University.
She started in Harlem and then ended up at Harvard. Brittany was clearly somebody who was very dedicated to her education and very dedicated to her future.
But due in large part to her modest background, life at Harvard wasn't always an easy fit for Brittany.
Brittany was in a completely different world from the world that she grew up in. At Harvard, most of the students come from an upper middle class to upper class financial background. She felt quite isolated.
Even so, the gifted student did make a handful of friends at Harvard. Among those was another New York native named Shaniqua Campbell.
Hey, girl. How are you? Great. How are you? Good. How's your day? Good.
Brittany worked with Shaniqua at the Harvard Student Assistance Office, and the two became fast friends.
Shaniqua Campbell was from the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and she attended a high school with an academic program that was just as rigorous as Brittany's in preparing students for the Ivy League.
But even with a friend like Shaniqua by her side, something still felt missing in Brittany's life. A man to share it with.
She's brilliant. She's got her whole life ahead of her. And she just has this one piece of her that's just not being fulfilled.
But one weekend, Brittany met someone who would change her life forever. Up-and-coming songwriter, Jabri Cockney.
I'm Jabri.
Hey, I'm Brittany.
It's nice to meet you, Brittany. I mean, forgive me for staring, but you're the most beautiful girl I've seen all night.
Jabri was very, very handsome, very attractive.
Hailing from Harlem, Jabri wasn't just dashing, he was also ambitious.
He grew up in a similar circumstance in a neighborhood that didn't have as much promise as he had hoped. But he was able to rise above that. He ended up becoming a songwriter. He wrote for acts such as New Edition, as well as Ryan Leslie.
For Brittany, one look at Jabri and she was hooked.
Brittany Smith falls for Jabri.
The son of a retired New York City police officer, Jabri was exactly the man Brittany felt she needed. He had a warm smile, a smooth style, and was a hometown celebrity.
He was charismatic. He made her feel good. And at the end of the day, what girl doesn't want to feel good?
Jabri visited Brittany nearly every week at Harvard. By her senior year, they were inseparable.
Hey.
What's up, baby?
She decided that she wanted to let him move into her dorm room and, him be her everything.
Since Jabri wasn't a Harvard student, Brittany had to keep their living arrangement in the Lowell House dorm a secret. But all the sneaking around was well worth the effort.
In a place where it's very easy to feel invisible, she became very important to him.
Living with the love of her life and just 2 weeks away from a Harvard degree, Brittany Smith's life seemed perfect.
She had a great boyfriend. She had a great education. She was finishing her education, and she had so much promise. The world was her oyster.
But then, May 18th, 2009, a terrifying shooting sent shockwaves through Harvard's campus. That afternoon, Brittany's due to meet a friend to shop for graduation dresses.
Hey, Brittany, it's me. I'm standing outside of your dorm. Where are you? Give me a call back.
After several hours, Brittany's still a no-show. It's an unusual move, especially for someone like her.
Brittany's nowhere to be found. It wasn't like Brittany not to answer her phone.
Given the mysterious shooting that just took place on Harvard's campus, friends fear the worst. But who is the victim in this horrifying shooting? And is it possible these two seemingly unrelated events are bound together in blood?
Don't pull a gun out if you're not about to use it. Go.
In May 2009, Harvard senior Brittany Smith and boyfriend Jabri Copney had all the makings of a beautiful life together.
She had a great relationship with someone that she really loved and trusted. She was 2 weeks away from graduating from the most prestigious university in the world. Everything was in front of her.
But on May 18th, Brittany went missing, leaving friends worried about her well-being. At the same time, police swarm Harvard's campus following a shooting inside the Kirkland House dormitory.
Can you tell me what happened? What did you see?
We just came from class. We noticed a guy come out of the Kirkland dorm right there, holding his stomach, bleeding.
Speaking to witnesses on the scene, they learned students had seen men fleeing the area moments after the shooting.
Was there anybody with them? Was anybody following them, chasing them?
There were 3 black males.
3 black males, okay.
One of the witnesses said when they saw 3 people run away from the scene of the crime, one was wearing an orange jacket.
The guy who got shot, have you ever seen him anywhere else around campus?
I've seen him before, just like in passing with class and stuff. I think his name's Justin.
Justin.
Detectives ultimately identified the victim as 21-year-old Justin Cosby. They reach out to Justin's family and inform them of his injuries.
I was completely devastated. I was in a state of shock.
Barely hanging on, Justin has been rushed into surgery.
I asked the doctor, was he going to die? And the doctor told me he could not promise that he wouldn't. I couldn't believe I was hearing him say that.
Even after surgery, Justin's wounds may be too severe to overcome.
Justin had been shot in the stomach, but the bullet had traveled towards his heart. Each time the blood pressure rised, then it dropped again. And I kept looking at the monitor until the monitor flatlined. And at the point of flatline, I just lost it.
Sorry, man, we're gonna need you to step out.
What's going on? Look, it's
Sorry, we're gonna need you to leave.
After frantic attempts to save his life, at 4 a.m., doctors pronounced Justin Cosby dead.
I just could not believe my son had actually died. This is my baby.
But who was Justin Cosby? And what could have sparked his terrible death? That evening, detectives sit down with Justin's mother to try and pinpoint a motive.
How long was Justin going to Harvard?
He's not a student at Harvard.
He's not a student at Harvard?
Justin was a student at Salem State University.
Justin was studying business administration, and he was also looking to study computer science.
He was so full of ambition, hope, life.
But what exactly was Justin doing on Harvard's campus that day? Questioning students, it doesn't take long for police to find one possible answer.
Justin supplemented his income by selling small amounts of marijuana to Harvard students.
Was it possible drugs had played some role in Justin's death? It seems plausible, but no one can imagine any of his regular customers were behind his violent death.
Everyone liked Justin, and he seemed to be pretty cool with just about everybody.
Detectives decide to pull Justin's phone records. Combing through his call log, they make a stunning discovery.
The last contact that he had was with Brittany Smith.
But Justin's friends and family have never heard of Brittany Smith.
They tried to contact her several times, and she didn't return any of their phone calls.
Is it possible Brittany's recent disappearance and Justin's murder are somehow connected?
Brittany Smith was the last person that he spoke with, according to the phone records. This makes one wonder, where is she? Is she a victim? Is she a suspect? At this point, it becomes a question of her safety.
Fearing the worst, detectives race across campus to Brittany's dorm room to conduct a welfare check.
The police went possibly looking for a body because she was missing.
Britt?
The knocks to Brittany's door go unanswered.
Brittany?
With help from the dorm's RA, police gain entry.
Once they opened the dorm room, there was absolutely nothing out of place. Everything was perfect.
It's hard to me. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong.
They said, this can't be a place of interest for us.
They kept going back to her room to look for her, and she wasn't there.
With one person dead, Brittany officially missing, and 3 potential suspects on the run, this investigation is growing more sinister and mysterious by the minute. But as detectives race to connect the dots, they'll soon uncover a startling new piece of evidence, along with a twisted trail leading back to the gates of Harvard's most famous rival, Yale University. It's now been hours since neighboring student Justin Cosby was gunned down at Harvard University. It's a crime that's rocked the campus and surrounding community and sent police on a desperate search for 22-year-old Brittany Smith.
Her phone number was the last phone number in Justin's phone. So that's a part of the mystery. Why is it that she's not answering her phone? Why is it that she haven't come back to the dorm?
Unsure if Brittany is also a victim or could somehow be involved in the murder of Justin Cosby, investigators decide to pay a visit to their counterparts at the Harvard University Police Department. Speaking to officers, they learn every student that enters a dormitory has to scan their school ID.
The police checked the Kirkland House security records. They discovered that Brittany's card had been swiped several times around the time of the murder.
But as police already know, Brittany lived in Lowell House, on the other side of campus from the dorm where Justin Cosby was shot. Still, there's no denying that someone did use her card to gain entry to the building that day.
Her card had been used so many times, so that's a little bit suspicious.
Given the circumstances, police decide to execute a search warrant on the Lowell House dormitory where Brittany lives. This seemingly routine search turns up something very unusual.
Well, looky here.
Look at a picture.
In one of the closets, they find an orange and black varsity Letterman's jacket that looks just like the jacket that was described by witnesses earlier who saw 3 men leaving the scene of the crime.
It's a startling discovery.
Got a bag we can take this in?
But detectives still don't know who the jacket belongs to or if it's an exact match.
Take a closer look at that.
After sending the jacket to the lab for processing, police expand their search to adjoining dorm rooms on the hunch that possibly another student used Brittany's card to gain entrance to the Kirkland dorm. It isn't long before they make another stunning discovery inside the nearby room of student Catherine Wilson.
Hey, look over here. What you got? It's loaded. Loaded? I can see inside in here.
It's a loaded 9mm handgun, the same caliber as the bullets recovered from Justin Cosby's body. But when detectives ask Catherine about the gun, they get more questions than answers.
Catherine, why did we find a gun underneath your bed?
I have no idea what you're talking about. You found a gun under my bed?
It's not your gun.
I don't own a gun.
Catherine says she typically leaves her door unlocked. and that someone must have stashed it there while she was out.
Why's your door unlocked?
This is Harvard campus. It's a safe place.
To detectives, it seems like Catherine's telling the truth, so they press her about the other women on her floor, one in particular.
You think Brittany might be involved?
Brittany? No way. She would never be involved in something like this.
But if Brittany's blockmate can't fathom Brittany killing Justin, then who had? One possible clue lay at the bottom of the bag that contained the pistol.
The police did find 2 IDs.
Those IDs belong to students from Yale.
I don't know those guys.
You don't know those guys?
No.
But what do 2 Yale students have to do with a murder on Harvard's campus? There's only one way to find out. Police bring Josh Bowman and Adam Cobb in for questioning. Detectives start with Josh.
How would you explain the fact is that we found your ID in a bag with a gun at Harvard?
When police confronted about why they found his ID at Harvard, he revealed a new story.
And what a story it turns out to be. Like Justin Cosby, Josh also has an entrepreneurial streak.
He was a Yale student who was dealing drugs at Yale.
Pressing Josh further, he eventually admits he does have a connection to Harvard.
I sell pot a little bit just to some people over at Harvard. I have a couple friends.
Then Josh drops one name detectives instantly recognize: Shaniqua Campbell.
Shaniqua was also a Harvard student and a friend of Brittany Smith's.
According to Josh, Shaniqua's no angel.
She was the real drug dealer on Harvard's campus. She sold a little bit of everything: marijuana, ecstasy, cocaine.
She's got all of it, man. Coke, ecstasy, shroom, I mean, all of it, everything. From what I know, she runs Harvard.
Josh claims that in 2008, he drove to Cambridge to attend the annual Harvard-Yale football game. Once there, Shaniqua summoned him to her dorm room for an impromptu meeting. When he arrived at her dorm, he wasn't greeted by Shaniqua, but by Brittany Smith's longtime boyfriend, Jabri Copney.
What's up?
What's up? Hey.
Hey, glad you came. Come on in.
How you doing?
Good.
See ya.
Jabri used to smoke pot with Shaniqua every day in her room.
So I was hoping to get my stuff.
I got it. But
Awesome.
before that, Jabri here, he wants to run some things by you.
Jabri propositioned to buy 3 pounds of marijuana from him.
All right. Let's do it.
The next weekend, he and his friend Adam drove down to New York to seal the deal.
He traveled to Grand Central Station to meet with Jabri.
But when they arrived, Jabri claimed he'd left some of the money at his Harlem apartment.
The 3 then travel back to Jabri's apartment to get the rest of the money. And Blaine Jiggets, or as he was introduced to the 2 of them, Fat Boy, was waiting for them. And they robbed the 2 Yale students of their 3 pounds of marijuana and take their IDs as well.
Josh's story is a revelation. But is it possible Josh's statement is simply a ploy to steer investigators away from himself? When detectives question Josh's friend Adam, he tells the same story. With no evidence to hold them, police decide to release Josh and Adam later that day. Faced with another dead end, police are still struggling to answer 2 key questions. Where is Brittany Smith? And who killed Justin Cosby? With a list of suspects growing longer by the day and ranging from street-level drug dealers to Ivy League preppies, police can't rule out any possibility.
The first thing that would come into play is this is a turf war. And if this is a turf war, we're going to end up in a very bad situation.
Harvard senior Brittany Smith thought she'd met the man of her dreams when Jabri Copney walked into her life. But their 2 lives took an unexpected turn when Brittany went missing following the shooting death of 21-year-old Justin Cosby.
Brittany is the last person to be contacted. And after the police tried to reach Brittany, she went AWOL. She could not be found.
Adding to the mystery is the fact police have recovered a suspicious jacket from Brittany's dorm room, a room she secretly shares with boyfriend Jabri, and a loaded handgun was found in a nearby room. When coupled with the statement of a student drug dealer from Yale, detectives are beginning to wonder if there's more to the relationship between Brittany's boyfriend, Jabrai, and her best friend, Shaniqua Campbell. Namely that Jabrai and Shaniqua might be partners in the campus drug trade and are behind the Cosby murder as well as Brittany's disappearance.
Shaniqua sold ecstasy and cocaine and all sorts of drugs and was well known as a drug dealer on campus.
Shaniqua is pretty sneaky. She is the cornerstone of this whole problem.
Police decide it's time to bring Shaniqua down to the station and press her for some answers.
Let's start by telling us where you were May 19th. Do you remember?
I was taking a filing exam.
Shaniqua Campbell was really irritated that the police were asking her questions in regards to Justin's murder.
According to Shaniqua, the only thing she knows about Justin is his reputation on campus.
He sold weed. Everybody knew that.
Well, word is, you may sling a little weed. Is that true?
Sometimes.
So did y'all like have the same supplier, the same clients?
We don't discuss that.
At first, Shaniqua seems to be telling the truth, but it's what Shaniqua says about her connection to Jabrai Copney that rings false.
When police asked Shaniqua Campbell if she knew Jabrai, she said yes, but only through her friend Brittany Smith.
Shaniqua says she barely knew Jabrai, let alone ever smoked any dope with him. As for Brittany, Shaniqua claims she hasn't seen her friend in days. To police, it all sounds pretty fishy. But with no evidence linking Shaniqua to Justin's murder or Brittany's disappearance, detectives are forced to let her go. But not long after their conversation, one burning question is finally answered.
24 hours after the shooting, Brittany Smith shows up in her dorm room.
Brittany,
Yes?
can we talk to you for a few minutes?
Yeah, come in.
Brittany, where have you been? We've been looking for you.
She tells police that she was homesick and she decided to go home to see her friends and family.
She said, "Oh, guys, I didn't even know you were looking for me. What happened?"
While detectives are relieved that Brittany is alive and well, they're curious why Brittany's key card had been used at the Kirkland dorm around the time of the murder.
We got your key card account, so we know you were over there.
Yeah, I just went to go visit a friend.
She said the swipe card had been used at Kirkland House because she had gone there to visit a friend.
From there, Brittany says she returned to her room, packed a bag, and headed to Boston's South Station Terminal to catch a bus back home to Harlem. But when police ask Brittany about the whereabouts of her boyfriend, Jabrai Copney, Brittany denies knowing anyone by that name.
Tell me about Jabrai.
Who's Jabrai?
Your boyfriend, Jabrai?
I don't know anyone by that name.
What are you talking about? Jabrai who? I have absolutely no idea who this person is, which would throw up a red flag.
Police had asked Brittany who her boyfriend was, and she had told them it was a boy named Jordan Coombs who lived in South Carolina.
So you don't know Jabrai at all?
No.
Police can tell Brittany is hiding something. Is it the fact that her boyfriend and best friend were potentially involved in a murder?
Brittany really loved Jabrai and lied to police.
But until Brittany opens up to police, there's little they can do to move the investigation forward. So detectives turn to Brittany's friends, hoping to learn a little bit more about her and Jabrai's relationship. It seems Jabrai had been enjoying all the perks of an Ivy League education, courtesy of Brittany and her electronic ID card.
It was basically like a vacation. You know, he had meals there, he had a place to stay, he was using all the gym, the cafeteria, he had a dorm to stay in. He got to go to Harvard without having to pay any tuition.
But according to Brittany's friends, like so many other legitimate Harvard undergrads, Jabrai started his own small business while on campus. Though Jabrai's startup wasn't exactly legal.
Copney had in fact set up a little gang from which he planned robberies, he sold drugs, all right on the Harvard campus, in the dormitory.
Brittany's friends tell investigators the drug dealing wasn't the only reason they didn't think too highly of Jabrai.
Brittany and Jabrai led a tumultuous relationship.
There's no record of anybody talking positively about their relationship. In fact, people saw them fighting.
Jabrai was a very jealous individual.
And apparently, when it came to Brittany's past, friends claimed Jabrai could get downright nasty.
Copney told her to get rid of the stuffed animals and the framed pictures of a previous relationship that she was in. Brittany then decided to hide these underneath her blockmate Catherine's bed.
It's the same bed where police had just recovered a loaded gun and 2 IDs, which begs the question, did Brittany know about the handgun? And whose was it? Jabrai's, Shaniqua's, or hers? Hoping to use this new information to get a better handle on Brittany's alibi, investigators head to Boston's South Bus Station. Pulling surveillance footage from the day of the shooting, officers spot Brittany boarding a bus bound for New York that evening. But Brittany wasn't traveling alone.
When they pull the tapes, they're shocked to find that Brittany did not go home alone. They find that she had purchased 3 other tickets as well as her own.
Could Brittany's entourage be the same 3 men witnesses had seen fleeing the scene of Justin Cosby's fatal shooting? If so, where are they now? As police intensify their manhunt, a shocking confession will finally reveal a twisted secret and a motive for murder. From the outside looking in, Brittany Smith and Jabrai Copney's love affair looked like a fairy tale. But following the murder of 21-year-old Justin Cosby, police have discovered that Jabrai was dealing drugs on the Harvard campus, and the couple's relationship was far from ideal.
Jabrai was very bossy to Brittany. He had a temper, and he ordered her around.
But just how far will Brittany go to protect the man she loves? A surveillance video taken on the day of the Cosby shooting shows Brittany boarding a bus with 3 other men.
Brittany bought 4 bus tickets, and they all boarded the bus together, and they went off to New York City.
Police quickly ID one of the men in the video, Jabrai Copney.
At that point, the police realized that Brittany had been lying to them about everything.
Brittany has turned an already bad situation into a worse situation. Because she lied to the police, now she becomes a suspect and not necessarily just a person of interest.
With Brittany refusing to tell the truth, police know it'll be hard to pin this crime on Jabrai and his 2 associates. Fortunately, they received the lab results on the orange and black Letterman jacket found in Brittany's room.
The forensic evidence showed that there was gunpowder on that jacket.
When they test the residue, they find that it also matches the residue found on the body of Justin.
They found gunpowder in it from the same weapon that was on the Catherine's bed. How coincidental.
The jacket, the loaded 9mm, the surveillance footage fleeing to New York City. The only things still missing are Jabrai and his crew. But then, on May 21st, much to the surprise of investigators, Jabrai Copney walks into the Cambridge Police Department and surrenders.
Jabrai actually turns himself in once he realizes that the police have a plethora of evidence against him.
Interviewing Jabrai, detectives soon learn the identities of the 2 other men in the surveillance video.
It was me, my man Fat Boy, and then it was Jason.
The men Jabrai is referring to are Jason Aquino and Blaine Fatboy Jiggets.
Blaine Jiggets and Jason Aquino were actually childhood friends, and they grew up together.
Basically, they wanted me to do a job for him, help him rob some marijuana from this Justin cat.
The Justin cat Jabrai is talking about is Justin Cosby. But according to Jabrai, the trio's plan to rob Justin went horribly from the get-go.
Jabrai, Jason, and Blaine lured Justin into the basement of the Kirkland house. When they were in the basement, they demanded that Justin show them the weed. Justin showed them the weed. They tried to take it from him.
They began to scuffle because Justin wasn't gonna let go of the marijuana without getting paid. Somewhere during the scuffle, Justin was shot 1 time.
It's an incredible story, but Jabrai's adamant he didn't pull the trigger.
Out of nowhere, Fat Boy pulls a gun out, pops him.
So Fat Boy had the gun?
Yeah.
Armed with this information, police arrest Jason Aquino and Blaine Jiggets in New York City and charged the trio with Justin's murder. On March 16, 2010, Brittany Smith is arrested and charged with accessory after the fact, illegal possession of a firearm, and willfully misleading a police officer. The arrest rocks the Harvard community.
When I found out that the killer was not a Harvard student, yet he was staying at Harvard, using all of Harvard's amenities, and he had staged this robbery and had set up my son, I was flabbergasted.
As is the university. 2 weeks before their graduation, Brittany, as well as her friend Shaniqua Campbell, are expelled for their alleged drug use and potential involvement in Justin's murder.
I couldn't imagine having a free ride at an Ivy League university and ruining, graduating, and going on with my life to do great things over a crime 2 weeks before I graduate.
But even after her arrest, it's clear Brittany's love for Jabrai trumps any doors a Harvard degree could have opened up for her.
They're writing each other, and she wanted to marry him at some point, which is shocking.
On April 6, 2011, nearly 2 years after the shooting, Jabrai Copney's murder trial begins in Woburn, Massachusetts. With Brittany refusing to turn on him, Jabrai enters the courtroom looking cool, collected, and confident he'll walk out a free man.
I just wanted to go over there and wring his freaking neck. But I knew that would not bring my son back.
In their opening statements, prosecutors assert that on May 18, 2009, Jabrai Copney, Blaine Jiggets, and Jason Aquino conspired to rob Justin Cosby.
Justin had come to Harvard to sell some marijuana to someone he thought was a student there. And it was a large quantity.
Jabrai contacted Justin to purchase marijuana. Justin was lured down into Kirkland House.
Justin was not a big drug dealer. Apparently, he thought he could make some quick money.
So, homeboy, you got that for me?
Yeah, I got that. You got that for me?
Yeah, you ain't gonna see it until I see what I need to see, partner.
All right. You wanna see us here? What's up? Where the money at?
They tried to take the marijuana from him, so he put up a fight.
Give me the bag. You pulling it out like you about to leave? You ain't about to do nothing with it. You're not about to take this bag from me.
And at that point, Jabrai Copney shot him.
Don't pull a gun out if you're not about to use it. You're not about to use it, don't pull it out. You ain't gonna do nothing.
Go. After the shooting, the three men immediately went back to Brittany's room, and Jabrai Copney told Brittany to hide the gun.
Prosecutors say Brittany, fueled by her love for Jabrai, did exactly as she was told. She hid the gun in the dorm room next to hers and fled on a bus with the three men back to New York.
Brittany was totally in this up to her neck. She provided the venue, the place where she allowed her boyfriend to come with his friends and load a gun in her room.
But without corroborating testimony, the state's case is largely circumstantial. Prosecutors give Brittany one last chance to come clean.
The prosecutor said, "You'd do anything to help Jabrai join Copney, wouldn't you?" And Brittany replied, "I've already tried everything and it failed. And now we're here."
That's what people do when they're in love. You do things for people that you're in love with that you wouldn't typically do.
Fortunately for prosecutors, Brittany's friend Shaniqua isn't quite so love-struck.
The deal that Shaniqua took was that she wouldn't be prosecuted if she gave the police truthful information about the crime.
Taking the stand, Shaniqua admits she regularly sold drugs at Harvard and was well aware of her competition, Justin Cosby.
Shaniqua was the one that apparently suggested to Jabrai to set up Justin, as she thought he would be an easy target.
Shaniqua says Jabrai agreed. It's an explosive revelation, but it pales in comparison to what Shaniqua reveals next.
Was your relationship strictly business, selling weed as it were?
In the beginning it was, but after a while, we were smoking weed, but anytime we smoked weed, it led to other things.
It came out that Shaniqua had actually been sleeping with Jabrai.
That was probably really hard for Brittany to swallow, that her best friend was sleeping with her boyfriend.
The love relationship between Brittany and Jabrai was one-sided. Brittany loved Jabrai. She would do whatever she could to help him. Jabrai's love to Brittany, or what she experienced the love, was really just something for his own benefit.
But in Cross, Jabrai's defense attorneys argue Shaniqua can't be trusted as a witness. Not only had she been quick to cooperate with police to avoid prosecution, she also had a long history of unscrupulous behavior.
Shaniqua was feeling some sort of infringement on her business because of Justin. And there was some manipulation on her part to actually get Justin out of the business a bit.
As for the actual shooting, Jabrai's attorneys argue that Blaine Fatboy Jiggets was the real trigger man.
The defense was that the actual shooter was Blaine Jiggets.
With everyone in the case pointing their fingers at each other, some observers wonder if the defense may have sown the seeds of reasonable doubt. But prosecutors still have one more witness left to call, and what she says will send shockwaves through the courtroom. Inside a Woburn, Massachusetts courtroom, prosecutors have asserted Jabrai Copney murdered Justin Cosby in a robbery gone awry, and then used his girlfriend, Harvard senior Brittany Smith, as a pawn to conceal his crime and hide the evidence.
Things like this just don't happen at an Ivy League school.
While Jabrai's defense attorneys don't dispute his involvement in the crime, they argue Jabrai's pal, Blaine Fatboy Jiggets, is the real trigger man. With so many fingers pointing in so many directions, a not guilty verdict seems like a done deal. That is until prosecutors call a state forensic expert to the stand. She tells the jury that a DNA swab of the murder weapon had indeed come back positive.
We were actually able to obtain a full DNA profile.
And who was that profile of, please?
It matched the defendant.
They did find that Copney's DNA was on the gun.
It's a damning piece of evidence, erasing any and all doubt as to just who murdered Justin Cosby.
Jabrai, he's the person that actually pulled the trigger. DNA doesn't lie. And his DNA was found on the weapon.
On April 22, 2011, jurors retired to deliberate Jabrai Copney's fate. Hours later, they returned with the verdict: guilty.
He's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
When he shot my son in the belly, it should have been a double murder rag, because that shot went straight to my heart, and it killed me also. I hope he never sees the light of day again.
6 months later, Brittany Smith pleads guilty to being an accessory after the fact, illegal possession of a firearm, willfully misleading a grand jury, and willfully misleading a police officer. She is sentenced to 3 years in prison.
Brittany really got a slap on the wrist. She was really the nucleus of this whole catastrophe.
If Brittany had owned up to her part in the beginning and told the truth, that she probably would not be in jail right now.
For his role in the murder, Blaine Jiggets receives a sentence of 9 to 12 years in prison. Jason Aquino receives 18 to 20 years. Despite her alleged involvement in Justin's murder, Shaniqua herself manages to avoid prison time.
Shaniqua really orchestrated all this thing. She's the one that was sleeping with Jabrai, yet she's the one that turned, and the prosecution said, "We want your testimony. You get no time."
While it's a verdict Justin's family still struggles with, they're not the only ones who lost out in this tragedy. For Brittany Smith, a young woman with so much promise, her blind love for a bad man ultimately cost her a life many aspire to, yet few can attain: the prestigious life of a bona fide Harvard graduate.
Brittany had her whole life in front of her, and Jabrai did nothing but weigh that down. She could have dated anyone she wanted to, but she chose Jabrai, and no one knows why, and that's something that she will regret for the rest of her life.
There is a profound, almost suffocating isolation that comes with standing on the edge of a remote island in the dead of night. In the heart of the South Pacific, far removed from the sprawling, illuminated highways of the mainland, the darkness does not merely fall, it consumes. It is a thick, tangible entity that swallows the landscape, leaving only the primal sounds of nature to guide the senses. Here, the ocean is not a serene backdrop, but a restless, roaring force, constantly hurling itself against jagged shores. This is American Samoa, a territory of breathtaking beauty during the daylight hours, characterized by lush, ragged coconut and banana trees swaying in the tropical winds. But when the sun dips below the horizon, the island transforms. The paradise becomes a labyrinth of shadows, and the natural elements take on an imposing, almost predatory quality. It is within this stark, unyielding environment that a tragedy unfolded, a tragedy that would not only shatter the quiet peace of the island, but also etch itself permanently into the annals of legal history. The case would eventually be known in the courtrooms as a definitive battle over the concept of proximate cause, a legal doctrine that seeks to find the true, unbroken chain of events leading to a fatal outcome. But before it was a case study in law schools, before it became a battleground for prosecutors and defense attorneys, it was simply a night of unimaginable horror for one individual. It was a moment where human negligence collided violently with the unforgiving forces of nature. To understand the gravity of what happened, one must first understand the setting, for the environment in this narrative is as much a character as the people involved. It is a story about the choices we make when we believe no one is watching, hidden under the cloak of a pitch-black night, and the devastating, irreversible consequences of those choices. The coastal highway of shadows. American Samoa is defined by its dramatic and hostile topography. It is a volcanic island, born from the violent eruptions of the earth, leaving behind steep, towering cliffs that drop precariously into the ocean. The coastal roads that connect the small, remote villages are feats of necessary engineering, carved directly into the sides of these ancient volcanic structures. These roads are the lifelines of the island, yet they are fraught with inherent peril. The specific stretch of highway where our story centers is a narrow, continuous ribbon of asphalt that winds relentlessly along the coastline. On one side, massive, dark walls of volcanic rock rise sharply, boxing in any traveler. On the other side lies a sheer, terrifying drop. There is no gentle slope leading to a sandy beach below. Instead, the cliff falls away abruptly into a violent expanse of deep water and razor-sharp coral reefs, a graveyard for anything that loses its footing on the edge. Adding to the profound danger of this geographical setup is the severe lack of infrastructure. In many parts of the modernized world, dangerous mountain passes are mitigated by heavy urban lighting, guardrails, and reflective markers. On this remote stretch of American Samoan Road, such luxuries are entirely absent. There are no streetlights to pierce the gloom. When night descends, the entire coastal pass plunges into an absolute, disorienting darkness. The only illumination comes from the sweeping beams of a vehicle's headlights, frantically slicing through the blackness as the car navigates the blind corners and sharp switchbacks. The visual contrast is stark and terrifying. The bright, artificial cone of light illuminating a few desperate meters of asphalt, framed by the infinite, suffocating black of the surrounding wilderness. The wind howls through the ragged foliage, and the crashing of the white sea foam against the black rocks creates a relentless, deafening roar that drowns out all other sounds. Driving this road at night is an exercise in extreme vigilance. It demands absolute respect for the terrain, a clear mind, and an unwavering focus. The margin for error is non-existent. A slight miscalculation, a moment of distraction, or a reckless press of the accelerator does not merely result in a minor collision, it invites catastrophic failure. The environment offers no second chances. The jagged reefs below wait patiently for the slightest mistake. It is a place that requires a driver to acknowledge their own vulnerability against the raw power of the landscape. Yet, human nature is often characterized by a dangerous hubris, a belief that one can master the unmasterable, or worse, a complete disregard for the fragility of life. The victim and the mask of the accused. On the night in question, the road was occupied by an individual named Pale Mia. The journey should have been routine, another passage through the winding darkness of the island's edge. Pale Mia was traversing this treacherous path, existing in that fragile bubble of safety that a vehicle provides against the outside elements. Like anyone navigating the coastal highway after dark, Pale Mia would have been surrounded by the oppressive blackness, guided only by the immediate stretch of illuminated road. There is a deep, resonant tragedy in the sheer normalcy of Pale Mia's presence on that road. We all take journeys expecting to reach our destinations. We all navigate the perilous paths of our respective environments with the assumption that, if we follow the rules of survival, we will return home. Pale Mia was simply existing, moving through the world, entirely unaware that the darkness ahead concealed a violent, unstoppable force hurtling toward them. That force was embodied by a man named Maze. To the casual observer, to the residents of the tight-knit island community where everyone knows their neighbors, Maze appeared completely unremarkable. He wore the convincing mask of an ordinary citizen. He presented himself as a family man, perhaps a husband and a father, a man who participated in the daily rhythms of island life. On a small island, reputation is a delicate fabric woven from daily interactions, and Maze had managed to project an image of normalcy. When faced with the horrific aftermath of the events to come, he would attempt to maintain this facade, playing the role of a tragic victim of circumstance, a man simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, cursed by fate and a dangerous road. However, beneath this carefully constructed exterior, beneath the calm demeanor and the strained smiles, lay a deeply troubling reality. Maze harbored a dangerous compulsion, a dark secret carefully hidden from the broader public view. He was a man with a severe addiction to speed and a history of profound recklessness. His past was stained with severe driving violations, a documented pattern of behavior that included driving under the influence and repeatedly ignoring speed limits. This was not a man who occasionally made a mistake. This was a man who habitually treated the road as his personal playground, demonstrating a chilling disregard for the safety of others. The small, insular nature of the community had perhaps allowed these prior transgressions to be quietly swept away or buried in dusty files. Connections, family ties, and the desire to avoid public shame often lead to the suppression of uncomfortable truths in isolated populations. But a pattern of gross negligence is a ticking clock. It is a psychological profile of someone who believes the rules of physics, law, and morality do not apply to them. Maze knew the coastal road. He knew the blind corners, the sheer drops, and the terrifying absence of light. He knew exactly how dangerous the environment was. Yet, armed with this knowledge, he chose to enter the darkness not with caution, but with an arrogant, lethal momentum. The convergence of fate and negligence. The tension of that night was built upon a deadly equation. On one side, there was the unforgiving environment, the narrow asphalt, the towering volcanic rock, the black abyss of the ocean, and the total absence of light. On the other side, there was Maze, a driver possessing a history of severe recklessness, barreling into the void. And caught in the middle of this catastrophic intersection was Pale Mia, an innocent traveler whose life was about to be violently intercepted. The story of this case is not simply about two cars meeting on a dark road. It is a profound exploration of responsibility. It asks us to consider where the blame truly lies when a tragedy is facilitated by a dangerous environment, but ignited by human folly. The impending disaster would rip the mask off Maze, exposing the horrific consequences of his hidden nature. It would plunge the small island community into a state of mourning and force the local justice system to confront deeply uncomfortable questions about accountability, the definition of an unavoidable accident, and the true meaning of gross negligence. As the heavy clouds obscured any faint starlight, and the ocean continued its violent assault on the coral reefs below, the stage was set for a confrontation between reckless human action and the fragile nature of human life. The engine of Maze's vehicle roared against the sound of the waves, a mechanical beast unleashed in a territory that demanded absolute silence and respect. The tires gripped the winding asphalt, pushing faster and harder into the blind, unlit curves. The headlights cut frantically through the blackness, revealing only fractions of a second of the road ahead, leaving no time for correction, no time for salvation. This was not a misfortune waiting to happen. It was a deliberate, high-speed plunge into the abyss, a fatal chain of events forged by a single individual's profound arrogance, speeding directly toward Pale Mia in the desolate, suffocating isolation of the American Samoan night. The sheer mechanical power of a speeding vehicle is easily masked by the isolation of an empty, lightless road. As Mays pushed his car along the treacherous coastal highway of American Samoa, the vehicle ceased to be a mere mode of transportation and transformed into a heavy, unguided projectile hurtling through the suffocating darkness. The engine strained against the steep inclines, its aggressive roar swallowed instantly by the vast emptiness of the Pacific Ocean stretching out beyond the cliffs. Inside the cabin, the heavy bass of music vibrated through the metal frame, acting as a sensory barrier against the hostile environment outside. This artificial atmosphere created a dangerous illusion of control, blinding the driver to the unforgiving reality of the narrow, winding asphalt just inches beneath the tires. The speedometer climbed well beyond any measure of safety or reason, driven by an arrogant disregard for the blind curves and the sheer, unprotected drops that defined the volcanic landscape. The headlights, sweeping frantically across the black rock walls and empty air, provided only a terrifyingly brief preview of the road ahead, offering a fraction of a second to react to any obstacle. It was a mathematical certainty that this velocity, combined with a total lack of visibility, would eventually demand a devastating toll. Approaching from the opposite direction, or perhaps navigating a precarious stretch of the same lane, Pale Mia was moving through the night with the quiet routine of an ordinary journey. The details of Polemia's final moments are trapped forever in the violent intersection of metal and momentum. There was no warning, no sudden illumination to signal the impending doom, only the abrupt, blinding glare of Mays's headlights cresting a blind curve at an impossible speed. The human brain requires critical milliseconds to process danger, to command the hands to turn the wheel, to force the foot against the brake pedal. Mays had stolen those milliseconds through his sheer velocity. The collision was not a mere traffic accident. It was a catastrophic transfer of kinetic energy. The sickening crunch of shattering safety glass, the agonizing scream of tearing steel, and the heavy, dull thud of the impact echoed briefly against the volcanic cliffs before being drowned out once more by the relentless crashing of the ocean waves. The force of the strike was absolute, immediately overwhelming the structural integrity of the vehicles and brutally halting Polemia's journey. The physics of the crash dictated a violent trajectory, pushing the wreckage toward the absolute edge of the precipice, where the fragile boundary between the road and the abyss was finally shattered. In the immediate aftermath, the roaring chaos of the collision was replaced by a heavy, unnatural stillness, broken only by the hiss of leaking fluids and the rhythmic, indifferent sound of the sea below. The darkness rushed back and to claim the scene, hiding the true extent of the devastation until the dawn. When the first pale light of morning finally broke across the South Pacific, it revealed a landscape of profound tragedy. The rising sun, usually a symbol of tropical beauty on the island, illuminated a jagged, torn scar along the edge of the coastal highway. Below, caught precariously on the unforgiving black volcanic rocks and the shallow, razor-sharp coral reefs, lay the mangled remnants of the collision. The metallic debris, twisted and crushed beyond recognition, stood in stark, horrific contrast to the natural, untamed beauty of the coastline. The morning light offered no comfort, only the cold, undeniable visual evidence of a life violently extinguished. First responders faced a monumental task, navigating the dangerous, unstable terrain to reach the wreckage. The isolation of the island and the treacherous geography meant that rescue efforts were inherently slow and perilous, requiring officers and emergency personnel to carefully descend the steep cliffs. Upon reaching the site, their worst fears were immediately confirmed. Pale Mia had suffered catastrophic, unsurvivable injuries from the sheer force of the impact. The destruction of the vehicle was so complete that the protective shell meant to save a human life had been crushed into a fatal trap. Pale Mia was pronounced dead, leaving the emergency crews to undertake the grim, solemn duty of recovering the victim from the harsh elements. The ocean breeze, usually carrying the scent of salt and blooming flora, was now heavily tainted with the sharp, acrid smell of burnt rubber, engine oil, and metallic dust. Amidst this scene of utter devastation stood Mays. He had survived the violent encounter, and the machinery of his psychological defense had already begun to turn. To the responding officers, he presented the image of a profoundly shaken man, a victim of the island's notoriously dangerous infrastructure. He projected a facade of bewilderment and grief, gripping his arms, staring blankly at the destruction, and leaning heavily into the narrative that the darkness and the sharp curve had conspired against him. His demeanor was carefully calibrated to evoke sympathy, to paint the event as a tragic, unavoidable consequence of living on a rugged, isolated territory where the roads themselves were inherently deadly. He was playing the role of the unfortunate survivor, masking the reckless choices that had directly engineered the fatal outcome. As news of the crash spread through the tight-knit villages of American Samoa, a heavy blanket of mourning settled over the territory. On an island where familial ties and community networks intertwine deeply, the loss of Palmia was not an abstract news story. It was a personal blow felt by neighbors, friends, and relatives. The collective grief was palpable, but it was quickly accompanied by a familiar, resigned narrative. The coastal road had long been a source of anxiety for the residents. It was easy, almost natural, for the community to direct their anger and sorrow at the treacherous geography, the lack of streetlights, and the unforgiving curves. The initial public sentiment heavily favored Mays's constructed narrative. People whispered about the dangers of the night, about how anyone could have made a mistake on that unlit stretch of asphalt. The environment itself became the primary suspect in the court of public opinion, providing the perfect cover for a man desperate to hide his culpability. However, the physical evidence left on the asphalt told a different, far more sinister story, one that the local police and investigators slowly began to piece together. The investigation phase in a remote location is meticulous and challenging. The environment constantly threatens to erase the clues, with tropical rains and ocean winds degrading the scene hour by hour. Yet, the deep gouges in the road surface, the specific scatter pattern of the shattered glass, and the agonizingly long, dark skid marks burned into the asphalt refused to align with the story of a simple miscalculation. The investigators measured the trajectory of the breaking lines, applying the strict laws of physics to the chaotic scene. The calculations pointed to an undeniable conclusion. The speed required to leave such extensive, desperate marks before the point of impact was astronomically high, far exceeding any reasonable or legal limit for that specific stretch of the coastal pass. The realization that extreme speed was a primary factor fundamentally shifted the nature of the inquiry. The local prosecutor, deeply familiar with the nuances of island law and the tragic history of the coastal roads, recognized that the physical evidence directly contradicted Mays's portrayal of helpless victimhood. The prosecutor understood that relying solely on tire marks and damaged metal would not be enough to secure a conviction against the powerful narrative of the dangerous environment. To prove criminal liability, to elevate the charge from a tragic accident to negligent homicide, the state needed to establish a state of mind, a continuous disregard for human life. The prosecutor needed to look beyond the jagged cliffs and the black asphalt, turning their attention instead to the man behind the wheel and the history he had so carefully concealed. This marked the beginning of a quiet, intensive excavation of bureaucratic records, a task made difficult by the complex social dynamics of the island. In small, isolated communities, reputations are fiercely protected, and embarrassing or damaging histories are often buried deep within dusty filing cabinets, shielded by local connections and familial influence. The prosecutor's office initiated a thorough audit of Mays's past, searching through old traffic citations, court summons, and police reports that had long been forgotten or intentionally overlooked. It was a tedious process of connecting disparate pieces of paper, fighting against a system that sometimes preferred to forget the transgressions of its own citizens. The investigation required persistence, pushing past the reluctance of local clerks and the unspoken rules of island loyalty. Eventually, the persistent digging yielded a profound and disturbing revelation. Deep within the archives, the investigators unearthed a thick, heavily documented file detailing Mays's driving history. It was a smoking gun made of paper and ink. The records painted a chilling portrait of a habitual offender, a man who had repeatedly and flagrantly violated the most basic rules of safety. There were multiple, severe citations for driving at excessive speeds, demonstrating a chronic inability to respect the limits of the road. More damningly, the files contained past incidents of driving under the influence, a clear indicator of a reckless disregard for the lives of others. This was not the profile of a careful family man who had simply fallen victim to a dark, dangerous curve. This was the profile of an addict, a man who possessed a compulsive need for velocity and a dangerous arrogance regarding his own abilities. The discovery of this hidden history was the crucial turning point in the case. It provided the prosecution with the exact ammunition needed to shatter Mays's carefully constructed mask. The dusty files transformed the narrative from an isolated incident of bad luck into the inevitable climax of a long, documented pattern of dangerous behavior. The evidence proved that Mays was intimately aware of his own dangerous tendencies and intimately aware of the severe hazards presented by the unlit coastal highway. Yet, possessing this dual knowledge, he had actively chosen to engage in wildly reckless behavior on the most dangerous road on the island. The prosecutor now had the foundation to build a case centered on gross negligence. Mays's past actions established that the fatal crash was not an unforeseeable tragedy caused by the environment, but a highly foreseeable consequence of his own repeated, deliberate choices. The island community, still grappling with the loss of Pale Mia, was about to be jolted by the revelation that the true danger on that pitch-black night was not the sharp curve or the sheer cliff, but the man gripping the steering wheel. The courtroom in American Samoa, usually a space of quiet procedural formality, became the stage for a visceral confrontation between the state's pursuit of justice and the defense's sophisticated attempt to obscure the truth. The air inside the chamber felt heavy, charged with the collective grief of a community that had lost one of its own and the palpable anxiety of a man fighting to keep his mask from shattering. When the trial commenced, the defense team, cognizant of the heavy reliance on the environment, launched a calculated assault on the prosecution's case. Their strategy was rooted in the legal doctrine of intervening causes, a concept they hoped would successfully break the chain of culpability linking Mays to the death of Pale Mia. The defense meticulously presented maps, topographical studies, and architectural evidence of the coastal highway. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the structural deficiencies of the road, emphasizing the extreme, almost impossible nature of the curves and the total lack of illumination. They spent hours presenting data about the lack of reflective materials, the instability of the volcanic soil, and the inherent, extreme hazard posed to any driver, regardless of speed. They argued that the tragedy was a product of a systemic failure, a death trap created by the government's own inability to maintain safe infrastructure. They framed Pale Mia's final moments not as the result of a collision, but as a series of tragic, forced responses to an unforgiving landscape. They suggested that Pale Mia, blinded by the darkness and suddenly confronted with a sharp curve, had reacted with a momentary, human error, a slight, reflexive turn of the steering wheel that inadvertently placed them in a more vulnerable position. By focusing intensely on the environmental factors and the victim's split-second reactions, the defense aimed to convince the jury that the catastrophe was an act of nature, a misfortune that no single driver could have entirely prevented. Their objective was to shift the burden of blame away from Mays and onto the very road itself, rendering the crash an inevitable, if tragic, result of living in an isolated territory with limited resources. The jury, comprised of local citizens who had traveled those same roads countless times, felt the resonance of the defense's argument. They knew the fear of driving in the dark, the tension of the blind turns, and the oppressive isolation of the night. For a moment, the prosecution's case appeared to falter. The defense had successfully created a vacuum of uncertainty, making it feel as though Mays were simply an unlucky individual who had been overwhelmed by the overwhelming power of the island's topography. The prosecution's initial narrative, that Mays's speed was the primary cause, seemed thin against the overwhelming physical reality of the dangerous road. It was in this moment of vulnerability that the prosecutor initiated their response, a maneuver that would permanently alter the trajectory of the trial. The prosecutor did not argue against the danger of the road. Instead, they leaned into it. In a pivotal moment of the proceedings, the state presented their case for proximate cause through the lens of foreseeability. They did not attempt to paint the road as safe. They painted it as a known, documented, and lethal hazard that Mays had entered with total, disregardful awareness. They argued that because Mays knew the environment was treacherous, his decision to drive at excessive speeds was not merely negligent, but an act of gross, criminal recklessness. The prosecutor brought forward the long-buried records, the thick files that the defense had hoped would remain hidden in the dusty corners of the administrative archives. The revelation of Mays's past was a seismic event in the courtroom. As the prosecutor read aloud the history of multiple citations for excessive speeding, prior incidents involving driving under the influence, and documented instances of aggressive maneuvers, the atmosphere shifted from one of sympathetic uncertainty to one of cold, hard recognition. The mask that Mays had worn throughout the trial, the image of the responsible family man caught in a cosmic accident, began to dissolve. The prosecutor used these records to establish a pattern, a consistent, habitual, and deliberate choice to value his own impulse for velocity over the lives of his fellow citizens. This was the crux of the state's argument regarding proximate cause. The chain of events leading to the crash had not been broken by the darkness, the curve, or the victim's reaction. The chain was unbroken, and it began with Mays's decision to operate a vehicle in a manner he knew, from his own extensive, troubled history, was likely to cause destruction. The prosecutor's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal and emotional clarity. They stood before the jury and dismantled the defense's narrative piece by piece. They did not focus on the physical mechanics of the collision, but on the psychological mechanics of the driver. They explained to the jury that the law does not hold a driver accountable for the existence of a dark road, but it does hold them accountable for the way they choose to navigate it. The darkness and the sharp curve were not intervening causes. They were simply conditions, and Mays, having traveled this road countless times, knew exactly what those conditions entailed. He was not surprised by the road. He was a master of its dangers who had chosen to gamble with the lives of others. The prosecutor's words were sharp and unyielding as they described the fatal crash, not as a tragedy facilitated by nature, but as a deliberate collision born from a lifetime of arrogance. The darkness was not the enemy, they argued. The darkness was merely the setting that Mays had chosen to exploit. The victim, Pale Mia, had not died because of a bad turn or a lack of streetlights. Pale Mia had died because Mays had turned his vehicle into a weapon of gross negligence. The courtroom fell silent as the jury retired to deliberate. The transformation of the trial from a case about road safety to a case about moral and legal culpability was complete. When the verdict was eventually returned, it was not merely a judgment of guilt, but an affirmation of the principle that personal responsibility cannot be mitigated by the environment. Mays was found guilty of negligent homicide. The verdict sent a shockwave through the island community, a clear, unmistakable message that the dangerous topography of American Samoa was not a license for recklessness. As the trial reached its conclusion, the focus shifted from the legal arguments to the broader, more sobering reality of the consequence. The sentencing phase did not simply involve the administration of a penalty. It served as the final chapter in the public reckoning of Mays's actions. The judge, in addressing the court, highlighted the necessity of the verdict in maintaining the integrity of life on the island. The outcome was a validation of the state's argument that the proximate cause of the death was not the external, environmental factors, but the internal, conscious decision-making of the defendant. The legal system had successfully peeled back the layers of circumstance and environment to reveal the undeniable truth of the man behind the wheel. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the coastal highway remained, as did the towering volcanic rocks and the deep, hungry ocean. The physical world had not changed, but the understanding of the tragedy had been forever altered. The case became a foundational pillar in the territory's legal history, a touchstone that would be cited in future discussions about the duty of care and the limits of defensive narratives. For the community, the grief of losing Pale Mia remained, but it was now coupled with a sense of clarity. The myth of the unavoidable accident had been dismantled, replaced by a firm, unwavering recognition of the lethal weight of personal accountability. The story of Mays and the tragic intersection on the cliffside road became a cautionary tale, whispered among drivers as they navigated the dark, winding curves of the island, a reminder that on the edge of the world, where the ocean meets the land, the only thing more dangerous than the shadows is the arrogance of the person guiding the light. The final scene of the trial left the gallery, the families, and the islanders with a profound, lingering reflection on the nature of justice, the fragility of existence, and the heavy, enduring cost of a single, reckless moment. The investigation following the initial, superficial assessment of the crash site was not merely a mechanical process of gathering physical evidence. It became a deep, surgical exploration into the systemic vulnerabilities of American Samoa's justice and administrative infrastructure. The local police, initially overwhelmed by the raw, kinetic violence of the collision, found themselves facing a secondary, invisible hurdle, the wall of community insularity. When a tragedy of this magnitude occurs on an isolated island where social networks are deeply intertwined, the immediate instinct of the community is often protective. There is a silent, pervasive pressure to frame such events as misfortunes, as the inevitable, cruel taxation exacted by the treacherous terrain of the volcanic landscape. This initial sentiment was the biggest ally of the defense. It created a fog of collective resignation that threatened to obscure the truth of what had occurred on that dark, unlit road. The lead investigators, tasked with compiling the official report, had to navigate this delicate landscape, knowing that every piece of evidence they unearthed would be scrutinized not just for its legal merit, but for its potential to destabilize the social order of the island. Every step of the formal investigation required a laborious documentation of the environment. Investigators had to physically traverse the stretch of the coastal highway where Palemia had lost their life, conducting nighttime reenactments that were as perilous as they were necessary. These sessions were conducted in the same suffocating darkness that Mays had encountered, with only the beams of police cruisers to mark the blind curves. Through these controlled tests, the investigators were able to map the exact sight lines, the braking distances required for various speeds, and the terrifyingly limited reaction time available to any motorist traveling those bends. They discovered that while the road was indeed a challenge, it was by no means an impossible one, provided that the driver adhered to a standard of caution appropriate for the extreme conditions. This finding was a foundational building block for the prosecution, as it proved that the tragedy was not a failure of infrastructure, but a failure of the human element. The investigators carefully documented the lack of skid marks that would have resulted from a rational, safe speed, contrasting these with the long, violent gouges that existed in reality. However, the most critical, and perhaps the most difficult, aspect of the investigation involved the deep dive into the defendant's life. The prosecutor's office recognized early on that they were not just trying a man for a single instance of negligence. They were trying a history. They initiated a comprehensive search through the archives of the local territorial government, seeking to reconstruct the life of a driver whose record had been carefully guarded. This was not a simple retrieval of files. It was a battle against institutional inertia and personal loyalties. In a place where everyone knows everyone's family name, the request for a complete, unredacted driving history was met with skepticism and, at times, active resistance. Clerks and administrative officers, operating under the influence of long-standing social connections, were initially reluctant to expose the depth of Mays's prior transgressions. The prosecutor had to apply formal legal pressure, issuing subpoenas that forced the release of documents that had been buried for years. As the boxes of files were systematically opened, a pattern emerged that was as clear as it was damning. The investigators discovered a recurring sequence of events: a traffic stop, a citation for reckless driving or speeding, a period of administrative suspension, and then a quiet, unofficial return to the road. There were multiple reports from residents who had previously complained about Mays's aggressive habits, reports that had been filed away and never acted upon. These weren't merely minor infractions. They were indicators of a chronic, systemic refusal to abide by the law. One particular file contained an incident from several years prior, where Mays had narrowly avoided a fatal collision, a warning sign that had been ignored by the authorities at the time. This historical data provided the prosecution with the foreseeability factor they so desperately needed. They could now argue in court that Mays was not a naive driver who had been surprised by the darkness, but a seasoned, calculated risk-taker who had been repeatedly warned of his own dangerous behavior and had consistently chosen to ignore it. The investigative process also extended to the vehicle itself, which had been towed to a secure, outdoor lot. The forensic technicians were tasked with performing a post-collision analysis, an incredibly complex job given the severe structural damage caused by the high-impact collision and the subsequent movement of the debris on the rocky coastline. By analyzing the engine's electronic control unit and the mechanical deformation of the chassis, they were able to estimate, with a high degree of mathematical certainty, the speed at which the vehicle had been traveling at the moment of impact. The numbers were staggering. They completely dismantled the defense's theory that the crash was a slow-motion event caused by a sudden, environmental obstruction. The data, cold and undeniable, showed a vehicle being pushed to its absolute limits, far beyond the threshold of safety that the road, with all its inherent, volcanic dangers, could possibly accommodate. This evidence, when paired with the reconstructed history of Mays's driving behavior, created an unassailable narrative of gross negligence. Throughout this period, the investigation was a heavy, emotional weight on the investigators themselves. They were not just processing a case, they were processing the grief of the victim's family, who were constantly present, seeking the answers that only a meticulous legal truth could provide. The investigators held multiple, somber meetings with the family, sharing updates that were as painful as they were necessary. They had to balance the rigor of the law with the empathy required when dealing with such a profound loss. They learned about Pale Mia, the life that had been cut short, the future that had been stolen by someone else's arrogance. This human element deepened the resolve of the prosecution team. They stopped viewing the case as a dry academic exercise in the theory of proximate cause and began to see it for what it truly was, an act of profound injustice that needed to be balanced by the scale of the law. As the trial preparation drew to a close, the investigative team had successfully constructed a timeline that left no room for ambiguity. They had proven that the defendant had the means, the motive, and the documented history to render the tragic night a foreseeable reality. They had dismantled the intervening cause argument by showing that there was no external, uncontrollable force that had intervened. The only force present was the conscious, reckless decision of the defendant to drive as if he were the only soul on the island. The final report was a comprehensive, damning indictment that would become the backbone of the trial. It was a victory for the concept of truth, an exhausting but necessary process of uncovering the layers of secrecy and social protection that had allowed a dangerous individual to operate with impunity for far too long. When the evidence was finally presented to the judge and jury, it stood as a monument to the tireless, painstaking work of investigators who had refused to let the darkness of the coastal road hide the light of accountability. They had ensured that the voice of the victim would be heard, and that the man who had turned the highway into a site of slaughter would be forced to account for every choice, every mile, and every millisecond of that fatal night. The thoroughness of their work was the final, deciding factor that transformed a local tragedy into an enduring legal precedent, ensuring that the memory of the event would serve as a guardian for the safety of all those who continue to traverse the beautiful, but dangerous, roads of American Samoa. The courtroom proceedings during the trial of Mays evolved into a profound exploration of human responsibility, marking a watershed moment in the legal history of American Samoa. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom itself seemed to mirror the tension of the coastal road, with the atmosphere shifting between clinical detachment and raw, palpable emotion. The prosecution's legal team stood as the architects of a narrative that sought to redefine the boundaries of accountability. They were not merely seeking a conviction for a specific act of vehicular homicide. They were attempting to fundamentally shift the island's judicial perspective on what constitutes a foreseeable consequence of human behavior. Central to this effort was their masterfully orchestrated presentation of the evidence, which aimed to bridge the gap between the chaotic, tragic reality of the collision and the abstract legal doctrine of proximate cause. During the initial phase of the trial, the defense leaned heavily into the local cultural and environmental context to build their narrative. They presented a series of testimonies from local experts, engineers, and longtime residents who painted a picture of the coastal highway as an inherently hostile and almost supernatural adversary. These witnesses spoke of the suddenness with which the island weather could change, the way the shadows danced to deceive even the most experienced drivers, and the treacherous, unforgiving nature of the volcanic terrain. The defense team's performance was masterful. They utilized maps and high-resolution photographs to turn the jury's own lived experiences against the prosecution. They wanted the jury to feel the fear of the dark road, to sympathize with the inherent instability of the geography, and to ultimately view Mays as an unfortunate, accidental victim of these extreme conditions. For a sustained period, this narrative held sway. The jurors, people who had all navigated these same curves with varying degrees of anxiety, found it easy to align their own memories of peril with the defendant's story. The defense's success in framing the environment as the primary antagonist was so effective that the trial risked becoming an inquiry into civil engineering rather than a criminal proceeding for a death caused by gross negligence. However, the prosecution's response was an exercise in disciplined, surgical deconstruction. They did not attempt to diminish the danger of the road, as doing so would have risked alienating the jury, who knew the truth of the terrain. Instead, they inverted the defense's premise. If the road was indeed as dangerous as the defense claimed, they argued, then any driver who chose to traverse it at high speeds with the knowledge of that danger was engaging in an act of profound, foreseeable recklessness. The prosecution's strategy hinged on the concept of intent, not in the sense of a desire to cause harm, but in the sense of a conscious disregard for the safety of others. They focused on the defendant's mind, asking the jury to consider what a reasonable person, knowing the absolute peril of the coastal pass, would do. The answer was simple. They would drive with extreme caution. By contrasting this standard of care with Mays's behavior, the prosecution began to peel away the layers of the defense's narrative, exposing the stark reality of the defendant's choices. The introduction of the recovered historical records marked the climactic turning point of the trial. As the clerk of the court presented the heavy, dusty files detailing Mays's past, the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. These documents were the physical manifestation of a pattern, a series of systemic, repeated failures to adhere to the most basic laws of safety. The prosecutor, with calculated, measured delivery, read through the records, drawing a direct, unbroken line between these past acts of negligence and the fatal event that had destroyed the life of the victim. Each citation for speeding, each instance of aggressive driving, and each past warning from the authorities acted as an indelible marker on a path that had ultimately led to the collision. This was not a story of a single, unlucky moment. It was a story of a life characterized by a consistent, flagrant disregard for the fundamental rules of existence in a shared, dangerous space. The defense's attempt to characterize the event as an intervening cause triggered by the road's conditions disintegrated under the weight of this cumulative evidence. The prosecution argued, with devastating clarity, that there was no intervention from the environment. The only force acting upon the situation was the defendant's own, long-standing, and predictable pattern of behavior. The emotional resonance of the victim's family, who sat in the gallery throughout the proceedings, provided the vital human core of the trial. Their quiet, persistent presence served as a constant reminder that the legal discourse concerning proximate cause was not merely an abstract exercise. Every time the prosecution referenced the crash, the family's collective pain grounded the legal arguments in the reality of the loss. When the prosecution spoke of the foreseeable nature of the accident, they were not just speaking of a legal theory, they were speaking of a life that had been stolen. The jury, initially swayed by the defense's focus on the geography of the island, began to see the defendant not as a peer caught in a moment of misfortune, but as a person whose arrogance had fundamentally violated the social contract. The shift in the jury's demeanor was evident. The nods of recognition for the defense's arguments about road conditions turned into focused, intense scrutiny of the defendant's testimony and his lack of remorse. The closing arguments stood as the definitive culmination of the trial's psychological and legal warfare. The prosecutor's speech was not a plea for retribution but a call for the restoration of order and responsibility. They synthesized the technical evidence, the braking distances, the speed calculations, and the environmental factors, with the historical evidence of the defendant's chronic, documented recklessness. They painted a picture of the coastal highway not as a malevolent force, but as a mirror reflecting the character of those who drove it. The defense's final attempt to recenter the road's danger felt hollow, lacking the moral weight of the prosecution's argument. The jury, having been presented with the clear, unequivocal evidence of the defendant's pattern of behavior and the absolute lack of an external, uncontrollable intervening cause, was left with a single, clear path to a verdict. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courthouse was filled with a tension that felt almost physical. The days of testimony had laid bare the inner workings of an island justice system being challenged to hold its own accountable. The verdict, when it finally arrived, was a profound, unambiguous statement of the community's values. By finding the defendant guilty of negligent homicide, the jury essentially ruled that the environment of American Samoa, no matter how treacherous or dark, does not provide a shelter for the reckless. The verdict did more than close the case. It established a precedent that would henceforth guide the legal understanding of vehicular responsibility in the territory. It settled the question of proximate cause in the minds of the islanders, affirming that the ultimate responsibility for a life taken on the road lies not with the landscape, but with the person whose hands are on the wheel. The courtroom, which had served as a witness to the profound, lingering pain of the loss, also became the place where a measure of justice was restored. The final session of the trial was a solemn, somber experience, not just for the parties involved, but for the entire community, which had been forced to look into the darkness of the coastal road and confront the truth of its own vulnerability and the necessity of personal accountability. The result was not just a legal victory, but a moral milestone that would ripple through the history of the island, serving as a reminder that even in the most isolated, unlit corners of the world, justice remains a duty that must be honored. The final judgment in the case of Mays versus the American Samoa government did not merely signify the end of a legal battle. It marked a profound and somber transition in the collective consciousness of the island territory. For the community of American Samoa, the trial acted as a painful, necessary mirror, reflecting not only the dangers of their roads, but also the inherent fragility of the social contract that held their isolated existence together. The verdict of negligent homicide resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom, lingering in the quiet, humid evenings as families gathered in their villages and whispered about the man who had turned a drive home into a death sentence. It was a victory for the family of Palmia, yet it was a victory colored by the irreversible nature of their loss, a stark reminder that while the law could assign accountability and deliver a measure of justice, it could never undo the violence of that dark, unlit night. The legal precedent established regarding the doctrine of proximate cause became the new framework for understanding the responsibilities of every person who chose to navigate the coastal highway, setting a clear, moral boundary between a tragic misfortune and an act of criminal disregard. The aftermath of the case rippled through the island's administrative and governmental corridors, forcing a long-overdue reckoning with the state of public infrastructure. The defense's earlier, opportunistic focus on the lack of lighting and the dangerous nature of the coastal curves had inadvertently cast a spotlight on the government's own shortcomings. In the months following the trial, there was a visible, concerted effort to address the safety deficiencies that had been so central to the debate. New, albeit modest, lighting projects were initiated, and signs warning of the extreme hazards were installed at the most notorious blind corners of the mountain passes. These changes were a direct, though bittersweet, legacy of the trial. The realization that while the road was not the legal cause of the tragedy, it was a physical manifestation of a hazard that the community had lived with for too long. The memory of the trial became an invisible, persistent presence on that stretch of road, a ghost that accompanied every driver as they navigated the sharp turns, cautioning them to respect the limit of their own vulnerability against the raw, volcanic power of their island home. For the judicial system of American Samoa, the case served as a transformative experience, hardening the resolve to pursue justice with greater transparency and vigor. The revelation that meses prior, severe driving violations had been buried in bureaucratic archives was a sobering lesson in the dangers of local favoritism and the suppression of inconvenient truths. The internal investigation that followed the trial led to a series of reforms within the local Department of Public Safety, ensuring that traffic records were no longer treated as private, negotiable assets, but as essential data points in the public record. This commitment to transparency was a critical outcome, one that promised a future where the history of an individual's reckless behavior could no longer be hidden behind the veil of local connections. It was a victory for the integrity of the law, ensuring that future cases of vehicular homicide would be judged with a full, unvarnished knowledge of a defendant's past, thereby upholding the principle that justice is not a matter of social standing, but a matter of evidence and conduct. The personal and social repercussions for the defendant, Mays, were deep and isolating. The mask he had tried to wear, the image of a responsible, accidental victim of the island's environment, had been permanently shattered by the prosecution's exposure of his true, habitual self. He was no longer just a name in a police report. He was now defined in the public record by his gross negligence and the catastrophic outcome of his arrogance. The sentence imposed upon him served as a grim testament to the gravity of his actions, removing him from the community he had so recklessly endangered. Yet, even within the confines of his legal consequences, the story of Mays remained a cautionary tale that served to educate the youth of the island. Schools and community centers used the case as a reference point to discuss the ethics of driving, the consequences of speed, and the life-altering impact of a single, impulsive decision. The tragedy of Palmia became a pillar in the local dialogue regarding the responsibility of the individual to the collective safety of the island, helping to instill a culture of caution that had been severely lacking prior to the trial. Reflecting on the deeper, existential implications of a case, one finds a profound meditation on the meaning of human choice in a world that is inherently unpredictable. We often navigate our lives under the illusion that our environments are static, manageable settings, but the reality, as demonstrated on the coastal highway of American Samoa, is that the environment is often indifferent to our ambitions and our errors. The darkness of the South Pacific night, the steep, jagged cliffs, and the roar of the surf were not obstacles that could be negotiated with or charmed. They were elements of a reality that demanded a specific, rigid standard of behavior. The case taught that when a person ignores these standards, they do not just endanger themselves, they impose a fatal toll on those around them. The concept of proximate cause, which had been the dry, academic focus of the lawyers, was transformed through the trial into a living, human principle that we are the final, decisive authors of our own tragedies, and that the chain of events that leads to a catastrophe is almost always forged by our own decisions long before the moment of impact. The legacy of the Mays case is ultimately one of enduring, somber introspection. The beauty of the American Samoan coastline remains, as does the danger of its roads, but the way in which the people of the island perceive these elements has been fundamentally shifted. They no longer look at the coastal highway as a simple, unavoidable risk of island living, but as a site of moral and legal consequence where their choices carry the weight of life and death. The trial, with all its tension, agony, and meticulous uncovering of the truth, succeeded in creating a cultural memory that serves to guard against the repetition of such a preventable tragedy. The memory of Palmia is honored not just by the public discourse that arose in the wake of the trial, but by the increased vigilance of those who now drive the roads with the understanding that they are responsible for their own safety and the safety of their neighbors. In the final assessment, the case is a reminder that in the most remote and isolated places on this earth, the fundamental tenets of justice and accountability hold an equal, if not greater, weight than they do in the centers of modern power. The trial proved that the law is not a tool used only in bustling metropolises, but an essential, living mechanism that can be applied to the most singular, tragic events to ensure that the truth is unearthed and the responsible are held to account. The narrative of Mays versus the American Samoa government will continue to be a standard for legal scholars and a cautionary legend for the people of the islands, a story that balances the darkness of human nature with the unyielding light of truth. It is a narrative that asks us to look at our own lives, at the risks we take, and at the ways in which we might inadvertently be the authors of our own fates. As the sun rises over the Pacific, casting its light upon the same coastal highway that witnessed so much pain, the memory of this trial stands as a testament to the belief that even the most desperate, isolated, and tragic moments can lead to a stronger, more just, and more responsible society. The final, lingering lesson of the case is that while we cannot always control the darkness of the road ahead, we hold the power and the profound, irrevocable duty to control the speed and intent with which we travel, ensuring that we do not lose our humanity in the process of chasing the horizon. The case closes not with a sense of triumph, but with a sense of solemn, hard-won wisdom that will serve to protect the island for generations to come, a silent, watchful sentinel in the shadow of the volcanic cliffs and the ever-present, roaring Pacific. The conclusion of the legal proceedings and the subsequent social adjustments did not signify an erasure of the event. Rather, they marked the beginning of a long, slow process of integration where the tragedy became woven into the cultural fabric of American Samoa. The case of Mays versus the American Samoa government evolved into a mythos that the islanders passed down, not as a fable of distant horrors, but as a grounded, pragmatic lesson in the realities of their environment. This seventh phase of the narrative, following the trial and the administrative reforms, delves into the enduring, quiet aftermath, the way the islanders continue to live, move, and exist alongside the memory of that fatal night. The road, which had once been viewed through a lens of fear or annoyance, took on the character of a solemn monument. Drivers, as they crested the blind curves and descended the volcanic passes, became more aware of the weight of their own presence in the darkness. The case had, in a sense, stripped away the naive comfort that the terrain was merely a backdrop, replacing it with a heightened, respectful awareness of the fragility of the human experience on such a remote, perilous stretch of asphalt. In the years that followed the conviction, the island saw a subtle shift in the social etiquette of the road. There developed an unspoken, community-wide understanding that the coastal highway demanded a specific decorum, a kind of unspoken pact among those who traveled it after dusk. This was not a change mandated by law, but a cultural shift driven by the lingering memory of the case. The reckless arrogance that had defined Mays's behavior became a social taboo, a mark of deep disrespect toward the community. People began to take notice of those who pushed the limits of speed or who treated the navigation of the blind curves with cavalier disregard. This peer-driven accountability became, in its own right, a powerful, unofficial enforcement mechanism. It reflected the profound impact the trial had on the collective consciousness, demonstrating that the justice system's final verdict had successfully catalyzed a deeper, more permanent change in the island's social norms. The trial had forced a public conversation about what it meant to be a neighbor and a fellow traveler, and that conversation had evolved into a standard of behavior that persisted long after the legal files were archived and the judge had moved on to other matters. The family of the victim, Pale Mia, eventually found a way to navigate their own grief, channeling the pain of their loss into the creation of a lasting tribute. While the court had dealt with the legalities of the death, the family sought to deal with the spiritual and emotional vacuum left in its wake. They advocated for the development of small, quiet roadside memorials, not of plastic or neon, but of simple, local stone, placed at the sites where the road felt most precarious. These markers were not intended as sites of performative mourning, but as subtle, persistent reminders of the preciousness of the lives that traveled the route. The family's presence in the community, their resilience in the face of such a violent injustice, became a beacon for others who had suffered their own losses in the silence of the island's nights. They became, in a sense, the keepers of the case's memory, ensuring that the lessons learned from the legal battle were never allowed to fade into the obscurity of bureaucratic history. Their endurance was a quiet, steady rebuttal to the chaos of the night, a testament to the idea that even the most devastating, preventable tragedy could lead to the formation of a more thoughtful, empathetic community. For the younger generation, growing up in the post-trial era, the name Mays and the events of that night became a cautionary historical reference point, a story told to emphasize the gravity of the responsibilities that come with adult life. They learned about the case in social studies and in the private, domestic settings of their homes, where the importance of caution and the weight of personal conduct were stressed as vital components of island life. They understood that the road was not just a path, but a test of character. The trial had turned the simple act of driving into a moral act, a daily, repetitive practice of choosing safety and community over the impulsive, selfish desire for velocity. This generational learning was perhaps the most enduring legacy of the entire ordeal. It ensured that the hard-won wisdom of the trial would be preserved and passed on, protecting the future of the territory by instilling in its youth a deep, ingrained respect for the risks inherent in their landscape. Moreover, the case prompted a broader investigation into the economic and infrastructural limitations that had, for so long, allowed such dangerous conditions to persist. The trial had forced the local government to justify its long-standing neglect of the coastal highway, leading to a series of reports and, eventually, a redirected flow of resources toward the improvement of remote infrastructure. This was a direct, tangible output of the legal precedent, an acknowledgement that if the government was going to expect its citizens to be held to the highest standards of safety, the government itself had to meet the highest standards of support. The improvements were not miraculous. The road remained, as it had always been, a narrow, volcanic passage, but the incremental upgrades, better guardrails, clearer markings, and the introduction of solar-powered lighting represented a structural, lasting improvement to the safety of the territory. The legal battle had essentially bridged the gap between the individual's duty to drive safely and the state's duty to provide the conditions in which safe driving was possible. As time continued its forward march, the intensity of the initial shock faded, replaced by a quiet, persistent, and matured understanding of the events. The case became a foundational element of American Samoan jurisprudence, a standard citation for any discussion on the nuances of negligence and the legal interpretation of environmental factors in criminal cases. Yet, for the average resident, the case remained more than a legal citation. It remained a human narrative, a story of an individual who had failed his community and a victim whose death had, paradoxically, strengthened the bonds of those left behind. The memory of the event became a silent, watchful sentinel, an intangible force that influenced the rhythm of life on the island. Every time a car navigated the curve at a reasonable speed, every time a driver chose to yield at a narrow point, and every time a neighbor reminded another to be careful in the dark, the memory of Pale Mia was honored. The case had not just provided justice in the narrow sense of a conviction. It had fostered a culture of vigilance that acted as a perpetual, invisible safeguard. The landscape, meanwhile, remained indifferent. The volcanic cliffs stood as they had for millennia, the waves continued their rhythmic, aggressive assault on the coral reefs, and the night air remained as thick and consuming as ever. The beauty of American Samoa was untarnished by the human tragedy, remaining a place of profound, natural wonder that continued to attract those who sought to experience the raw power of the Pacific. But for those who lived there, the landscape had been infused with a new, somber depth of meaning. It was no longer just a paradise of sea and stone. It was a site of human fallibility, a place where the grandeur of nature was forced to coexist with the consequences of human choice. The final, overarching theme of this long, collective experience was the recognition that we are all, in a sense, traveling the same dark, winding road, and that our only true protection against the abyss is the care we extend to one another and the caution we exercise in our own actions. The narrative of Mays versus the American Samoa government serves as a bridge between the past and the future, a reminder of the fragility of our existence and the enduring power of justice to shape the society we live in, ensuring that the shadows of the past continue to protect the people of the present. The story finds its closure not in the finality of the courtroom, but in the ongoing, daily life of the island, where the memory of the night remains a light, small but persistent, held against the vast, eternal darkness of the sea and the sky. This wisdom, earned through the lens of profound pain and rectified through the steady, impartial hand of the law, remains the territory's most valuable asset, a safeguard against the darkness that would otherwise threaten to swallow the fragile, precious connections of a community bound by the sea and the shared journey of their lives. In the ultimate reflection upon the case of Mays versus the American Samoa government, we must confront the final, silent truths that emerge when the legal records are closed and the public discourse has settled into the quiet rhythms of daily life. This eighth and concluding part of our exploration shifts from the granular details of the trial to the abstract, haunting questions about human nature that remain long after the gavel has struck its final blow. The case was never merely about the collision of two vehicles on a coastal highway. It was a meditation on the darkness we carry within ourselves and how, in the right environment, that internal darkness can manifest as external destruction. The coastal road of American Samoa, with its sharp, unyielding curves and its total absence of light, served as a perfect, natural metaphor for the hidden corners of the human psyche, the parts of ourselves we attempt to mask with social performance and polite, everyday interactions. When Mays drove that night, he was not just navigating a path of asphalt and stone. He was navigating the logical, inevitable conclusion of a life spent avoiding the consequences of his own character. The profound tragedy of this case lies in its total preventability, a fact that haunts the collective memory of the islanders. Had the defendant possessed even a modicum of self-awareness, had he chosen to respect the limits of his environment, or had the system been more rigorous in its early interventions, Pale Mia would likely still be walking the beaches of their home today. This realization forces us to grapple with the discomforting idea that our safety, in the final analysis, is fundamentally tied to the choices of others, that we are all, in a sense, hostage to the decisions made by the strangers with whom we share the road. This vulnerability is the price of our participation in a shared society, yet the trial of Mays demonstrated that we are not entirely helpless against the recklessness of others. The legal system, when functioning with integrity, acts as a guardian, a mechanism that can hold the individual accountable and, in doing so, reinforce the boundaries of our mutual safety. The conviction of Mays was an affirmation that the individual cannot operate in a vacuum of impunity. Their actions have repercussions that ripple outward, shattering lives and altering the course of entire communities. As we look back at the testimony, the arguments, and the final verdict, we are reminded of the power of the truth to emerge even when it is buried under layers of social protection and bureaucratic neglect. The persistence of the prosecution, the courage of the witnesses who eventually stepped forward, and the patience of the jury all reflect a fundamental human desire to see the world made right after a significant wrong. There is a sense of order restored, a quiet dignity salvaged from the debris of the wreckage. Yet, even in this restoration, there is a persistent, somber note of reflection. The law can provide a label for the tragedy, classifying it as negligent homicide, and it can provide a consequence, in the form of incarceration, but it cannot address the deeper, spiritual vacuum that allowed such a catastrophe to occur in the first place. This brings us back to the role of the individual, the role that each of us plays in the maintenance of our own moral compass. The case serves as an enduring, silent prompt to each of us. How do we act when we are hidden from the eyes of our neighbors? How do we treat the fragility of others when we are tempted by our own personal impulses for power, speed, or dominance? The landscape of American Samoa continues to endure, seemingly indifferent to the small, tragic human dramas played out upon its volcanic stages. The ocean continues its eternal cycle of violence and creation, and the cliffs remain as stoic observers of the lives that pass beneath them. There is a profound, almost comforting permanence in the natural world that contrasts sharply with the volatility of human existence. The island does not remember the crash in the way that people do. It simply continues to exist. But for the people who reside there, the land has been transformed, becoming a repository for the memory of what occurred. The coastal road is now a place where the past and the present constantly intersect, a place where every driver who slows down at a blind curve is silently honoring the life of the person who was lost. This is the true, lasting legacy of the case, a transformation of the physical environment into a site of collective, moral resonance. The tragedy has not been forgotten. It has been assimilated into the island story, becoming part of the wisdom that defines what it means to be a member of this unique, isolated community. In considering the broader, global relevance of such a case, we see that the themes of Mays versus the American Samoa government are universal. The tensions between the individual's pursuit of their own desires and the community's right to safety are played out in every city, on every highway, and in every village across the globe. The legal struggles of a small, Pacific territory resonate with the challenges faced by societies everywhere as we grapple with the definition of negligence, the nature of proximate cause, and the ongoing demand for accountability in an age of increasing speed and distraction. The case is a microcosm of a much larger, global conversation about the necessity of responsibility in the modern era. It reminds us that our technological capacity, our ability to propel ourselves at high speeds across the landscape, has far outstripped our ethical capacity to regulate those actions, and that we must constantly work to bridge this gap, lest we find ourselves continually repeating the same, avoidable cycles of destruction. The story ends with the quiet, persistent awareness that safety is not a state of being, but an active, ongoing practice. It is a daily, minute-by-minute commitment to the welfare of others, a recognition that the road we travel is never truly ours alone. The memory of Pale Mia remains as a light, a small, steady flame kept burning in the hearts of those who knew them and those who, through the narrative of the case, have come to understand the weight of the loss. The island continues its existence, a vibrant, beautiful, and sometimes dangerous paradise, where life is lived with a heightened, newfound sense of care. The legal battle has concluded. The dust has settled on the files, and the defendant has faced the judgment of his peers, but the process of healing and the work of preservation remain ongoing. It is in the day-to-day decisions of the islanders, the choice to check the mirror, the choice to slow down at a dark corner, the choice to prioritize the life of another over the thrill of the moment, that the case finds its true and most lasting resolution. This narrative, spanning the breadth of the environment, the mechanics of the law, and the depths of the human heart, serves as a testament to the idea that no act of destruction is ever truly final, provided we are willing to learn, to change, and to hold one another to the standards of our shared humanity. The shadows that fell upon the coastal highway on that fateful night were long and heavy, but the response of the community, the integrity of the law, and the resilience of the human spirit have proven to be stronger. We are left with a final, enduring impression that while we cannot prevent the darkness from coming, we have the absolute, undeniable power to control the light we carry, ensuring that we never lose our way in the deep, winding, and unforgiving passages of our lives. The case stands as a monument to this power, a silent, watchful sentinel in the shadow of the volcanic peaks, reminding us that we are the keepers of each other's safety and that the path forward is always one of care, of vigilance, and of a commitment to the enduring, sacred value of every life that traverses the fragile, beautiful road toward home. This is the closing, final word of the story, written in the indelible ink of history, and it remains, forever, a beacon for those who choose to travel with honor and respect. The final echoes of the case of Mays versus the American Samoa government have long since faded from the courtroom, yet the resonance of its truth remains embedded in the very geology of the island. As we traverse the final landscape of this narrative, we find that the true resolution of such a profound tragedy is not found in the finality of a prison sentence, but in the ongoing, quiet persistence of a community that has chosen to define itself by its resilience. The ninth and concluding segment of this exploration invites us to consider the long-term arc of memory and the way in which a society, when faced with the violent rupture of its peace, reconstructs itself into something more conscious and more protective of the individual life. The road that once represented a site of fatal negligence has, through the passage of time and the labor of justice, become a symbol of the island's maturity, a place where the past is not forgotten, but where it serves as a necessary, sobering guide for the future. We are reminded that the life of Pale Mia, though stolen in a heartbeat of recklessness, has been woven into the collective identity of American Samoa, serving as a permanent anchor for the values of caution, empathy, and social responsibility. Looking back at the trajectory of this journey, from the pitch-black, suffocating night on the coastal pass to the final, measured deliberations of the court, we recognize that the case was an exercise in stripping away the illusions we construct to protect ourselves from the reality of our own fragility. Mays's defense, which sought to frame the environment as the culprit, was a reflection of our universal desire to deflect blame, to look for a convenient, inanimate scapegoat when we are confronted with the terrifying consequences of our own choices. The legal system's rejection of this defense was perhaps the most crucial moment of the entire saga, for it stood as a definitive declaration that nature, however harsh or unforgiving, does not absolve the individual of their duty to act with care. This principle, once firmly established in the legal precedent of a territory, has acted as a shield for the community, ensuring that the burden of safety remains where it belongs, squarely on the shoulders of the person behind the wheel. The clarity of this moral and legal standard has been the silent protector of the island's roads in the years since, fostering a culture where the sanctity of life is prioritized over the pursuit of selfish, high-speed impulses. The institutional reforms that followed the trial were not mere cosmetic changes. They represented a fundamental pivot in how the government and the people of American Samoa interact with the challenges of their own geography. By demanding transparency, by ensuring that the history of a driver's behavior is never again suppressed, and by incrementally investing in the physical safety of the highways, the community has effectively claimed its right to a safer existence. This shift from reactive grief to proactive safety is the hallmark of a society that has learned from its wounds. The memory of the trial continues to influence local policy, ensuring that the safety of the populace is treated as a foundational element of public discourse rather than an afterthought to be managed only after a disaster has occurred. This evolution in governance, while sparked by the agony of a single night, has created a safer, more stable environment for all, demonstrating that even the most localized tragedies can be the catalysts for meaningful, widespread reform. As we consider the broader, humanistic takeaway of this long account, we are struck by the endurance of the human spirit in the face of what appears to be an indifferent universe. The cliffs, the reefs, and the dark, deep waters of the Pacific remain as stoic, uncaring witnesses to the passage of human time, but the people who live beneath their shadow have cultivated a response of profound care. They have turned the site of a tragedy into a locus of collective wisdom, proving that we are not defined by the worst things that happen to us, but by the integrity with which we respond to those events. The story of Mays versus the American Samoa government is a testament to the idea that justice, in its most profound sense, is the active restoration of balance after a violation. It is the refusal to let a life be extinguished in silence, and the determination to ensure that the memory of that life serves to protect those who remain. In this light, the legal case was merely the instrument, while the true work of justice was, and continues to be, the ongoing commitment of the islanders to one another. The memory of the victim, Palemia, is no longer limited to the tears of their family. It has been transformed into a living legacy of awareness. Every child who is taught to respect the road, every driver who hesitates before a blind turn, and every official who prioritizes the safety of the public record is honoring that memory. This is the ultimate, quiet victory over the darkness of that fateful night. The case has ceased to be just a narrative of crime and punishment. It has become a narrative of preservation and growth. The islanders have proven that they are the authors of their own safety, a community bound not just by the geography of their home, but by a shared, hard-won understanding of the costs of negligence and the necessity of mutual care. The story stands as a beacon, illuminating the winding, dangerous paths of our shared journey and reminding us that no matter how isolated we may feel, we are connected by the simple, enduring reality of our presence in the lives of others. In our final reflection on the landscape, we see the coastal highway anew. It is no longer a path of dread, but a path of experience, a route that has been mapped by the history of those who came before. The Pacific waves, crashing against the rocks with the same relentless force they have possessed for ages, seem to whisper a lesson of persistence and change. We are reminded that our lives, like the road itself, are fragile, beautiful, and subject to the sudden shifts of fortune, but that we possess the agency to choose how we travel. The journey is not about the speed at which we move or the thrill of the destination. It is about the respect we accord to the path and to the fellow travelers we encounter in the dark. The case of Mays versus the American Samoa government has provided a moral map for this journey, a testament to the belief that even in the darkest, most isolated corners of the world, we can find the light of truth if we are brave enough to hold it. Thus, we bring this extensive account to a close, not with a sense of conclusion, but with a sense of continuity. The story of the trial will remain a part of the island's lore, a quiet, watchful sentinel that ensures the mistakes of the past are not the architects of the future. The people of American Samoa continue their daily lives, bound by the sea and the sky, and empowered by the wisdom of their collective history. The memory of the night remains, softened by time but sharpened by the lessons it has imparted, and in that memory, we find a lasting comfort. We are left with the final, enduring truth that our greatest protection in an unpredictable world is the character we cultivate and the commitment we make to the dignity and safety of every human life. The road remains, the night remains, and the Pacific remains, but the people have changed, for they now walk with the knowledge of their own strength and the memory of a tragedy that was met with the steady, unyielding light of justice. This is the story, this is the truth, and this is the enduring legacy of a case that has become more than just a matter of law. It has become a matter of the heart, a guiding star for all who travel the long, winding roads of our shared existence toward a future defined by safety, by honor, and by the precious, unbreakable bond of our humanity. As the final chapter of this long and somber reflection draws to a close, we find ourselves standing once more at the edge of the Pacific, looking out over the same vast, dark expanse that witnessed the tragedy of that fateful night in American Samoa. The case of Mays versus the American Samoa government has been dissected through the lens of legal doctrine, psychological analysis, and social impact, yet to truly understand the gravity of these events, we must look beyond the verdict and consider the eternal, silent questions that remain in the aftermath of such a profound loss. What does it mean to live in a community bound by the sea and the stone, where the environment is not a mere backdrop, but an active participant in our daily existence? The trial revealed that our vulnerabilities are not just external, inherent in the sharp cliffs and the pitch-black nights, but internal, rooted in the choices we make when we believe that the weight of our actions is ours alone to bear. The enduring resonance of this case lies in the way it forced an entire territory to confront the uncomfortable reality that human negligence is the most dangerous force of all, far more lethal than any curve in the road or any absence of light. The narrative of this legal battle serves as a definitive case study in the doctrine of proximate cause, but more importantly, it serves as a testament to the power of a community to demand truth. There is a quiet, profound victory in the fact that the history of the defendant was finally brought into the light, shattering the facade of accidental misfortune and forcing the law to reflect the reality of his character. This was not merely a victory for the prosecution or a fulfillment of a legal requirement. It was a restoration of the moral order of the island. By holding Mays accountable for his documented pattern of recklessness, the judicial system affirmed that no one is above the consequences of their choices, and that the protection of the collective outweighs the private preservation of an individual's reputation. This precedent has become a cornerstone of local life, a silent, unseen guardian that shapes the behavior of every driver who navigates the island's narrow, volcanic passes. It has transformed the experience of travel into an act of shared responsibility, where the safety of the individual is understood to be inextricably linked to the caution and awareness of the whole. We must also recognize the quiet, enduring resilience of the victim's family, whose presence throughout the proceedings grounded the abstract legal arguments in the visceral reality of grief. Their story is the heart of this entire account, a reminder that behind every case file, every motion, and every judicial opinion, there is a human life that has been irrevocably shattered. The way they navigated the long, arduous process of seeking justice, never wavering in their demand for the truth, is an inspiration to all who find themselves navigating the cold, impersonal machinery of the legal system. They became the keepers of the memory, ensuring that the trial was not just a historical note, but a living, breathing exercise in the pursuit of fairness. Their strength in the face of such senseless violence speaks to the capacity of the human heart to find meaning in the midst of utter devastation, to turn the pain of a personal tragedy into the fuel for a broader, community-wide commitment to safety and mutual care. The transformation of the coastal highway itself serves as a physical reflection of the lessons learned. Where once there was only the dangerous, dark, and silent road, there is now a pathway infused with the memory of the past. The small, local stone memorials placed at precarious turns are not just markers of sorrow. They are quiet, steady sentinels that whisper to every passerby of the fragility of the road and the importance of respect. They serve as a physical manifestation of the island's collective memory, a bridge between the darkness of the tragedy and the light of the newfound awareness. These markers, together with the improved road conditions and the heightened sense of public vigilance, have created a landscape that is undeniably safer than the one that existed before. The tragedy, in a paradoxical way, has become the foundation of a more protective, more watchful, and more connected community, proving that even from the deepest ruptures of our peace, it is possible to build a structure that is stronger and more resilient than what came before. As we move forward into the future, we carry with us the wisdom earned through the lens of this profound experience. The case of Mays versus the American Samoa government is a permanent, indelible part of the territory's identity, a story that will continue to be told to the generations that follow. It is a story that balances the darkness of human fallibility with the enduring, illuminating light of justice, and it remains a vital, active force in the life of the island. The lessons learned here are not just for the people of American Samoa. They are for everyone, everywhere, who navigates the winding, dangerous, and beautiful roads of their own lives. We are all travelers in the dark, and we are all responsible for the light we carry, for the speed with which we travel, and for the care we show to the strangers who cross our path in the night. The road we share is fragile, and the consequences of our choices are far-reaching, yet as long as we hold fast to the principles of accountability, empathy, and collective care, we can navigate the deepest darkness and find our way home. The final, silent reflection upon this narrative brings us back to the simple, profound truth of our interconnectedness. The life of Pale Mia, though lost, continues to speak to us through the safer roads, the more transparent laws, and the more vigilant culture of the territory. The trial may have concluded, but the work of justice, the work of being our brothers and sisters' keeper, remains a daily, ongoing commitment. We choose to live in a society that values the sanctity of life, and this choice requires us to constantly evaluate our own behavior, to take ownership of our own recklessness, and to recognize the profound, lasting impact we have on the lives of others. The story of this case is not just about a tragedy that occurred. It is about the response to that tragedy, and in that response, we find the best of our shared humanity. It is a story of how a community, when tested to its absolute limit, chose the path of truth and the pursuit of justice, ensuring that the light of memory would never be extinguished by the shadows of the past. As the sun sets over the American Samoan coast, casting its final, golden light upon the rugged volcanic cliffs, we are left with a sense of peace that is earned, not given. The roaring of the Pacific remains, the night will surely return, and the roads will continue to wind through the dark, but we move forward with a clearer understanding of our own role in the safety of our world. The case has been a teacher, a guide, and a witness, and its legacy is a stronger, more informed, and more compassionate society. We conclude this exploration with a sense of profound gratitude for the truth that was unearthed, for the justice that was delivered, and for the enduring, silent strength of a community that has emerged from the darkness into a future defined by a deepened respect for the precious, fragile, and irreplaceable nature of every life. This is the truth we carry with us, a light that remains constant against the vast, eternal, and beautiful mystery of our shared existence, a beacon of justice and humanity that will forever watch over the winding, dark, and forever changing roads of our world, guiding us always toward a future where our actions reflect the very best of who we are, and where the memory of those we have lost serves to protect the future of those we love. This is the final, true legacy of the case, an enduring, sacred testament to the value of justice and the light that we, together, can cast against the dark. The conclusion of this extensive examination brings us to a final, contemplative synthesis, where the echoes of the courtroom and the physical reality of the American Samoan landscape converge into a singular, enduring truth. Throughout this exhaustive narrative, we have explored the anatomy of a tragedy, moving from the initial, visceral shock of the collision to the complex legal maneuvers that define the trial of Mays. Yet, beneath the technical discussions of proximate cause and the meticulous reconstruction of the crime scene, there lies a broader, more humanistic inquiry that has been the silent pulse of our entire journey. This final segment serves as a meditation on the permanence of the changes wrought by such an event, examining how a society integrates profound loss into its collective consciousness and how the pursuit of justice, even in its most clinical form, ultimately serves a spiritual function in binding a community back together after it has been violently torn apart. The road along the coast, once a silent witness to a moment of madness, has been transformed by the weight of our scrutiny and the clarity of the legal outcome into something profoundly different. It is now a path of memory, a place where the past does not merely exist in the shadows, but actively informs the safety of the present. The legacy of the case is not contained within the walls of a courtroom or the pages of a legal archive, but in the subtle, daily habits of those who continue to traverse the volcanic passes. We see this in the way drivers navigate the blind corners, with a heightened, respectful awareness that transcends the simple necessity of transport. The trial succeeded in elevating the act of driving from a mundane, utilitarian task to a moral performance, one where the individual acknowledges their place within a delicate, interconnected web of lives. This is perhaps the most significant outcome of the entire ordeal, the internalization of the duty of care. The community has moved beyond the reactive phase of grief and into a phase of proactive protection, where the knowledge of what can go wrong serves as the primary safeguard against the darkness. This transition, while born of immense pain, has imbued the territory with a sense of collective maturity, demonstrating that the trauma of the past can, with the right application of truth and accountability, provide the foundation for a more secure and enlightened future. We must also consider the role of truth as an active, restorative agent in the life of a community. The investigative work that dismantled the defendant's false narrative was more than just a procedural victory. It was an act of healing. By forcing the reality of the defendant's past into the public eye, the prosecution did not just secure a conviction. They validated the lived experience of the community and acknowledged the reality of the victim's worth. This process of uncovering, of refusing to let the shadows of the past protect the guilty, is the essential mechanism of justice. It allows a society to move forward without the burden of unresolved questions or the lingering poison of resentment. In the end, the trial proved that the truth is the only currency that matters in the reconstruction of peace. It provided the family of Palmia with the clarity they needed, and it provided the community with the confirmation that their values, their safety, and their dignity were worth defending, even at the cost of intense public exposure. As we look toward the horizon of the future, the lessons of this case remain a constant, guiding light. The legal principles established, the infrastructural improvements made, and the shift in social norms are all threads in the same tapestry of protection. The story of Mays versus the American Samoa government is a permanent fixture in the territory's identity, a touchstone that reminds us that our choices, our speed, our awareness, and our regard for the lives of others are the ultimate determinants of the world we live in. We are reminded that justice is not a static destination but a continuous, active practice, a commitment we must renew every time we step into the roles that require us to be the guardians of our own and each other's safety. This realization is both a burden and a privilege, a recognition that we are the authors of our own outcomes, and that the quality of our existence is defined by the care we weave into the fabric of our daily lives. In reflecting on the nature of the landscape itself, we acknowledge that the Pacific, in its vast, eternal indifference, will continue to shape the island in ways that remain beyond our control. The storms will come, the tides will rise, and the land will change, but our capacity to respond to these shifts with justice and empathy remains our most potent tool. The case has taught us that we need not be defeated by the volatility of our world. Rather, we can build a structure of ethics and accountability that withstands the pressures of the environment. The memory of the trial is a silent, watchful sentinel that guards against the repetition of error, ensuring that the progress we have made is not lost to the erosion of time or the complacency of the present. It stands as a testament to the fact that, even in the most isolated, unlit corners of our world, the light of human conscience can prevail if we are willing to fight for it. The final, lasting image of this journey is not of the collision, nor of the courtroom, nor of the sentencing, but of the ongoing, quiet persistence of life on the island. It is the image of a car navigating the coastal highway at twilight, the driver mindful of the curves, respectful of the darkness, and aware of the precious weight of the life they carry. It is the image of a community that has looked into the abyss of human failure and chosen to build a bridge of safety in its place. This is the true and most profound resolution of the story, a commitment to a future where the darkness is no longer a source of fear, but a setting for the careful, protective, and respectful conduct of our shared lives. We carry the lessons of the past like a lantern, ensuring that every step we take is illuminated by the wisdom we have so dearly earned. Thus, we conclude our exploration with a sense of profound, quiet gratitude for the journey we have shared. We have examined the darkest, most difficult passages of a human drama and emerged with a deeper appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Mays versus the American Samoa government is no longer just a legal file or a historical event. It is a vital, living part of our collective consciousness, a narrative that has shaped our understanding of what it means to be responsible for one another. We leave the story behind, but its truths remain, a beacon for all who travel the winding roads of our shared existence toward a future of peace, of caution, and of a shared, unshakable respect for the sanctity of every life. This is the truth we have sought, the justice we have honored, and the memory we have vowed to keep. It remains, forever, a silent witness to the light we carry against the darkness, a testament to the enduring, sacred value of the road we travel together. The story concludes, yet the lesson persists, a permanent fixture in the landscape of our shared humanity, reminding us that we are the architects of our own safety, the keepers of our own history, and the hopeful pilgrims of a future where we move through the dark with the steady, unwavering light of justice as our constant guide.